The ballroom smelled like candle wax and crushed roses, and Alara hated both. She stood near the edge of the room, her back almost touching the cold stone wall, watching the dancers spin under the chandeliers. Her dress was too tight at the ribs. Olivia had laced it that morning and said, "You'll thank me later," which Alara doubted very much. 3 months, that's how long she'd been the Alpha King's intended. Not his mate. Not officially anything, really, except the girl whose name kept appearing next to his in whispered conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Kyle hadn't claimed her. He hadn't even properly courted her. There had been a meeting between their fathers, a treaty that needed sealing, and somehow her future had been decided over wine and old maps while she sat 2 rooms away embroidering something she didn't care about. She looked across the ballroom at him now. Kyle stood near the throne dais, taller than everyone around him, his dark hair pushed back, his jaw set in that permanent expression of mild irritation he seemed to carry everywhere. 3 advisors hovered near him, talking too fast, gesturing too much. He wasn't listening. She could tell. His eyes kept moving, scanning the room, the way a wolf scans a tree line. She wondered if he was looking for her. She doubted it. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," a voice said beside her. She turned. A man she didn't recognize stood there, holding 2 glasses of something pale gold. He had an easy smile, the kind that didn't take itself too seriously, and sandy hair that fell slightly over his forehead. "Is it that obvious?" she asked. Painfully, he said, and handed her one of the glasses without asking if she wanted it. "I'm Theo." "Alara, I know," he said. "Everyone knows who you are. You're the reason half this room is pretending to enjoy themselves." She almost laughed. Almost, that's a strange way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it. He looked toward the dance floor. "Do you dance?" "Not really. Neither do I," he said. "But I'm told that's not actually a requirement. Apparently, you just move and hope for the best." She looked at him properly this time. He wasn't a shifter, she could tell by his scent, faint and human. Nothing like the heavy musk that clung to every wolf in the room. Human guests were rare here. The kind of detail her father would have noted with suspicion. "You're human," she said. "Guilty," Theo said. "I'm here with the trade delegation. Mostly I stand near important people and nod." "That sounds exhausting. It's a living," he said. He glanced at the dance floor again, then back at her. "So, dance with me?" She should have said no. She knew that even as the word stayed lodged somewhere behind her teeth, but there was something about the easy way he asked, like it wasn't a big decision, like dancing with a stranger at a political ball wasn't going to detonate anything. "Fine," she said, "but if you step on my feet, I'm telling everyone you did it on purpose." "Fair," he said, and led her onto the floor. The music was slow, something with strings, the kind of song meant for careful, formal steps. Theo wasn't bad at it, actually, despite his protests. He held her hand lightly, his other hand at her waist, proper distance maintained, nothing improper at all. It was, by any reasonable measure, an unremarkable dance, except for the way the room had gone quiet. She felt it before she saw it. The conversation near the dais had stopped. The murmur of the crowd had dipped, like the air itself had thinned. She didn't need to turn her head to know why. Kyle was watching. She danced anyway. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't his. Not officially. Nothing had been signed. Nothing claimed. No bite. No bond. She was free to dance with whoever asked her, human delegate or not, and if Kyle had a problem with that, he should have said something 3 months ago instead of sending his advisors to negotiate her future like she was a parcel of land. "You've gone somewhere else," Theo said quietly. "Sorry," she said. "Bad habit." "Is it him?" Theo asked, tilting his head slightly toward the dais without quite looking. "The king?" "It's complicated," she said. "It usually is," Theo said, with the kind of easy sympathy that made her like him a little, even though she barely knew him. The song moved into its second verse. She caught Kael's eyes once, across the room, just for a second. And what she saw there made something cold drop through her stomach. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was sharper than anger. Focused, like he'd already decided something and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. She looked away first. "He's coming over, isn't he?" Theo said, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't know," Alara said. "Maybe. You don't sound thrilled either way." "I'm not," she admitted. "I just don't know which version of him is about to show up." Theo's grip on her hand tightened, just slightly, not painfully, just enough that she noticed. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're allowed to dance with someone. That's not a crime." "Try telling him that," she said. The song was nearing its end. The strings began their slow descent toward the final note, the kind of resolution that should have felt like relief. It didn't. She felt the shift in the room before she understood what caused it, a ripple. A collective intake of breath, dozens of heads turning at once like compass needles finding magnetic north. Kael was walking toward them. He moved the way wolves move when they're trying very hard not to look like they're stalking something. Measured, deliberate, every step controlled in a way that somehow made it worse, because she knew exactly how much control that took. "Alara," he said, his voice low, carrying easily across the suddenly silent floor. She let go of Theo's hand. "Your Majesty," she said, "because that's what you said, that's what protocol demanded, even though 3 months ago he'd told her to call him Kael when no one was listening." He looked at Theo. Just looked. Didn't say a word. Theo, to his credit, didn't flinch. "I was just dancing with the lady," he said. "Nothing more sinister than that." Kael's jaw tightened. The muscle there jumped once, visibly like something straining against a leash. "The song's over," Kael said. It wasn't. There were still a few bars left, the final cadence hanging unresolved in the air. But no one argued. The musicians, sensing something they couldn't name but understood anyway, let the song trail off into nothing. Alara stood there in the sudden silence, Theo a step back from her now, Kael directly in front of her, and the entire ballroom watching like they were the only thing in the world worth seeing. "You should go," Kael said to Theo. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Theo glanced at Alara, a question in his eyes, "Are you okay? Should I stay?" And she gave him the smallest shake of her head. "Not now. Not like this." "Of course," Theo said smoothly, like he hadn't just been dismissed by the most powerful man in the room. He gave a small bow, the kind diplomats learn early, and walked off toward the refreshment tables without looking back. Alara turned to Kael. Up close, she could see what the distance had hidden the tightness around his eyes, the way his nostrils flared slightly, breathing in something he didn't like. "That was unnecessary," she said. "Was it?" Kael said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "It was a dance, Kael, one dance. With a human delegate who probably didn't even know he was committing a crime by asking." "He knew," Kael said. "He didn't. Everyone in this room knows who you are," Kael said, his voice still low, but with something hard underneath it now, like stone beneath soil. "Everyone knows what you are to me. What am I to you?" She asked, and she hated how much she meant the question, hated that 3 months of silence and politics and careful distance had built up to this exact moment in front of half the kingdom, with the music gone and everyone listening. Kael's jaw worked. He didn't answer. "That's what I thought," she said quietly, and the words came out more bitter than she'd intended. "Alara, you haven't claimed me," she said, lowering her own voice now, aware suddenly of how many ears were straining to catch every word. "You haven't even tried to court me properly. We've had maybe a dozen real conversations since the treaty, and most of those were arguments. So forgive me if I don't understand what right you have to clear a dance floor because I spent 3 minutes with someone who was kind to me." Kind, Kyle repeated, like the word tasted wrong in his mouth. Yes, kind. It's a foreign concept, I know, given the company I usually keep. Something flickered across his face, not quite hurt, but adjacent to it. The kind of expression a man gets when an accusation lands somewhere true. You think I haven't tried, he said. I think you've sent advisors. I think you've sent gifts I didn't ask for and don't particularly want. I think you've watched me from across rooms like tonight, and I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Because you've never told me. I'm telling you now, he said, and his voice dropped even further, rough at the edges. Watch me. What does that mean? He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he turned, just slightly, toward the dais, toward the small cluster of advisors and lords who had gathered there, all of them pretending not to watch while watching very intently. Marcus, Kale said. A thin, balding man stepped forward, the head of his border guard, someone Alara had seen at exactly 2 prior functions and never spoken to. Your Majesty. Send word to the Eastern Garrison, Kyle said. Tonight, the room, which had been quiet, went somehow quieter, like the air had been pulled out of it entirely. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, the Eastern Garrison borders the human territories. Are you I'm declaring it? Kyle said. Tonight, before this song finishes. Alara felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, though she hadn't moved at all. Declaring what, she said, though some sick part of her already knew. Kyle turned back to her. His eyes were dark, almost entirely pupil, the way they got when his control was slipping, when the wolf underneath was closer to the surface than the man wanted to admit. War, he said. The word landed like something physical. She heard gasps around the room, low murmurs breaking out, someone near the back actually dropping a glass that shattered against the stone floor. Against who? She demanded, though she could already guess. The humans? Because I danced with one of their delegates? This isn't about the dance, Kyle said. It's exactly about the dance, she snapped. You're standing here right now in front of the entire court declaring war on a kingdom because I had one dance with their representative. Do you understand how insane that sounds? It's not about him specifically, Kale said, and for the first time his composure cracked, just slightly. Just enough that she could hear something underneath the royal authority, something that sounded almost like panic. It's about every single person in this room watching another man's hands on you and not understanding why that makes me want to tear the walls down. The honesty of it stunned her into silence. Around them, the court had gone fully still, every eye fixed on the 2 of them, the unfinished song hanging somewhere in the rafters like an accusation. That's not a reason for war, she finally said, quieter now. That's a reason for a conversation. One we should have had months ago. Marcus, still standing awkwardly between them and the rest of the room, cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if I may, shall I send the order? Or wait, Kale said, his eyes never leaving Alara's face. The entire ballroom waited with him. Nobody moved. Alara could feel her own pulse in her throat, fast and uneven, and she was aware distantly, like she was watching herself from somewhere above the chandelier, that she was furious and frightened and something else she didn't have a name for yet. Kyle, she said. Look at me. He already was. He hadn't stopped. You can't do this, she said. You can't declare war because you're jealous. Do you understand what that would mean? Real people, soldiers, families, over a dance. It's not about the dance, he said again, but quieter this time, like the certainty in his voice from a moment ago had cracked open and something raw was leaking through. Then what is it about? Tell me. Right now, in front of everyone, since apparently that's where we're having this conversation. For a long moment he said nothing. The court watched, frozen, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on a room like humidity before a storm. It's about 3 months, Kale finally said, of watching you sit in that garden every morning, alone, because nobody told you that you were allowed to ask for company. It's about every letter I started writing and tore up because I didn't know how to say what I meant without sounding like I was issuing a decree. It's about tonight, watching some stranger make you laugh in under 5 minutes when I've spent 3 months failing to do that even once. Alara's chest tightened. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected anger, posturing, some kind of territorial nonsense about claims and ownership. She hadn't expected him to sound like he was confessing something that cost him. "You could have just talked to me," she said, softer now. "I know," he said. "I'm not good at it." "Clearly," she said, and despite everything, despite the absurdity of the moment, there was something almost like a laugh hiding underneath her words. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty," he said again, with the air of a man who very much wanted permission to leave. "The garrison stand down," Kyle said, not looking at him. "No order. Not tonight." A visible ripple of relief moved through the gathered court, shoulders dropping, breath released. Somewhere near the back, a lord muttered something to his companion that sounded suspiciously like "thank the gods." Alara stared at KL. "You almost started a war," she said, "and then you just stood down. Like that." "I almost did a lot of things tonight," he said. "Most of them were mistakes." "Most? All of them," he corrected. All of them were mistakes. She felt something in her chest loosen slightly, though she wasn't ready to call it forgiveness. Not yet. Not with the echo of that word war still hanging in the rafters above them. "This isn't over," she said. "You don't get to almost start a war and then act like a few honest words fix it." "I know," he said. "I mean it, KL. I know," he said again. And this time there was something steadier in his voice, like he'd found his footing after stumbling badly. "But I'd like the chance to try. Properly, not through advisors, not through treaties, just me. Talking to you, if you'll let me." The whole court was still watching, still listening, dozens of nobles pretending not to hang on every word, while hanging on every word completely. "Not here," Alara said. "No," he agreed, "not here." He extended his hand, not in the formal way he might have offered it for a dance, but simply, palm up, an invitation rather than a command. She looked at it for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, aware of every eye in the room, she reached out and took it. They left the ballroom through a side door that led to a narrow stone corridor, cool and dim after the heat and light of the celebration. The sound of the gathered court faded behind them, replaced by the quieter hum of the castle at night-distant footsteps, the occasional crackle of a wall torch, wind pushing faintly through old stone. Alara didn't let go of his hand, though she wasn't entirely sure why. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere quieter," Kale said. "Somewhere I can actually think without 400 people listening to every word. You mean somewhere you can apologize without an audience." "That too," he admitted. He led her up a narrow spiral staircase, the kind that wound tight enough to make her slightly dizzy by the third turn, and out onto a small stone balcony that overlooked the eastern gardens. The night air hit her immediately cold, sharp, clean after the cloying perfume of the ballroom. Below them, the gardens were dark except for a scattering of lanterns along the paths, small pools of gold light in the blue-black dark. "I used to come here as a boy," Kyle said, leaning against the stone railing, "when my father was being particularly unbearable." "Which was often. You never told me that," Alara said. "I've never told anyone that," he said. It seemed too small a thing to mention. She looked at him in the dim light. Without the crowd, without the throne room posture he carried everywhere, he looked younger somehow. Tired in a way she hadn't quite noticed before. "You frightened me tonight," she said. He turned to look at her properly. "I know, not because of the war," she said. "Well, partly because of the war, but mostly because, for a second, I genuinely didn't know who you were. The man making that declaration didn't look like someone I'd ever spoken to before. Kyle was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the dark gardens below. My father used to say that wolves who love too carefully end up losing everything, he said eventually. He said the only safe way to hold something was to never let it go in the first place, never give it room to leave. That sounds like a terrible way to live, Alara said. It was, he said. I watched him do it to my mother for 20 years. She wasn't happy. She was contained. He shook his head slightly, like he was trying to dislodge the memory. I told myself I'd be different. And then tonight, the second I saw another man's hand on your waist, I understood exactly how he became what he became. Alara stepped closer, her arms crossed against the cold. That's not an excuse, she said. Understanding where the fear comes from doesn't mean you get to act on it. I didn't act on it, he said. Not fully. I stood down. After you'd already given the order, she pointed out, you don't get credit for stopping a fire you started. He flinched slightly at that, and she could see it land, see him absorb the fairness of it even though it clearly cost him to hear. You're right, he said simply. I usually am, she said, and this time there was the faintest edge of a smile in it, despite everything. He almost smiled back. Almost. Tell me something true, she said, not a declaration, not a royal proclamation, just something true. About you. About this. He thought about it for a long moment, the wind moving through his dark hair, his hands gripping the stone railing like he needed something solid to hold on to. I've wanted to claim you since the second week, he said finally. Not because of the treaty, not because my father arranged it, because you walked into that first dinner looking like you'd rather be set on fire than sit through another political meal, and you said something so sharp to my chief advisor that he didn't speak for the rest of the evening, and I thought there. That's a person. Not a political arrangement, a person. Alara felt something tighten in her throat. I didn't say anything, he continued, because I didn't know how to separate wanting you from needing you to fulfill the treaty. I didn't want you to think I only saw the arrangement. So I said nothing instead. Which apparently was worse. It was worse, she agreed quietly. I know that now, he said. The wind picked up slightly, cold enough that she shivered, and without thinking he stepped closer, close enough that some of his warmth reached her even without touching. What happens now? She asked. Now, he said, I'd like to try doing this properly. Courting you. Actually talking to you instead of sending people to do it for me. No more disappearing into politics every time something feels too honest to say out loud. And if I say no, then I respect that, he said, and the effort it took him to say it was visible, a muscle working in his jaw. Even though it would be the hardest thing I've ever done. She studied him for a long moment, the cold gardens below, the distant sound of music starting up again from the ballroom, life resuming without them. Ask me properly, she said. Not a declaration. An actual question. Kyle straightened slightly, like he was steadying himself. Alara, he said, would you let me court you? Properly, slowly, however long it takes for you to trust that I mean it. She let the silence stretch, just long enough that she saw a flicker of genuine fear cross his face, the first real fear she'd seen from him all night, sharper than anything to do with wars or treaties. Yes, she said finally, but you start by apologizing to that delegate. Theo, Kale said, like the name tasted bitter. Theo, she confirmed. Properly, tomorrow, fine, Kale said, though it clearly cost him something. And no more declaring war over dances. I make no further promises about wars, he said, but I'll work on the dancing part. Despite everything, despite the ballroom, the silence, the unfinished song still echoing somewhere in her memory, Alara found herself laughing. The next morning, Alara woke late, her head heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from emotion rather than physical exertion. Sunlight cut through the gap in her curtains in a single bright line across the floor, and for a moment she lay there trying to convince herself that last night hadn't actually happened. It had. She got dressed slowly, choosing a plain dress instead of anything formal, the kind of choice that felt like armor against whatever the day might bring. When she finally made her way down to the breakfast hall, she found it nearly empty except for one figure sitting at the long table, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his fine clothes. "Theo, you're still here," she said. Surprised, "The delegation doesn't leave until tomorrow," he said, standing slightly as she entered, then seeming unsure whether that was the correct response, and sitting back down. "Though after last night, I half expected an armed escort to the border." "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "About all of it. You didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of whatever that was." "Royal jealousy?" Theo offered, with a faint smile. "It's fine. Genuinely, I've seen worse at smaller parties. You have not." "No," he admitted. "I haven't. That was easily the most dramatic thing I've witnessed at any social function in my entire life. My sister is going to be furious she missed it." Alara sat down across from him, grateful for the easy humor even though her stomach still felt unsettled from the night before. "For what it's worth, he's coming to apologize." "Today, apparently?" "Is he?" Theo said, raising an eyebrow. "That should be an interesting conversation. You don't have to stay for it," she said. "If you'd rather avoid the whole thing." "And miss the Alpha King grovel?" "Absolutely not." Theo grinned. "I'm a delegate. Witnessing uncomfortable diplomatic moments is technically my job." She almost laughed, and the sound surprised her how easily it came even after everything. As if summoned by the conversation itself, Kael appeared in the doorway of the breakfast hall. He looked different in the morning light, less composed than the night before. His hair slightly less perfect, dressed more simply than his usual formal attire. He stopped when he saw them both sitting together, and for a moment something flickered across his face that Alara recognized immediately as old instinct trying to resurface. He pushed it down. She watched him do it, watched the visible effort. "Theo," Kael said, walking forward and stopping a respectful distance away. "May I speak with you?" "You're speaking with me right now," Theo said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. Kael's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't snap. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for last night. My behavior was unacceptable. You did nothing wrong, and I treated you as though you had." Theo studied him for a long moment, the kind of evaluation that Alara suspected came from years of diplomatic training, reading a person's sincerity beneath their words. "Apology accepted," Theo said finally. "Though I'll admit, watching you almost declare war over one dance was the most entertaining diplomatic incident I've witnessed in 3 years of this job." "I'm thrilled to have provided entertainment," Kael said dryly, though there was the faintest hint of self-deprecating humor underneath it, something Alara hadn't expected from him. "You should be," Theo said. "It's not every day someone makes border policy decisions based on jealousy in real time. I might write a report about it." "Please don't," Kael said. "I make no promises," Theo said, and this time he was definitely smiling. Alara watched the exchange with something like relief loosening the knot that had been sitting in her chest since the night before. It wasn't fully resolved, she knew that. There were still conversations to have, trust to rebuild, the larger question of treaties and futures still hanging over everything. But this at least felt like a start. "I should let you two finish breakfast," Kael said, glancing at Alara. "I have a council meeting. Apparently I have some explaining to do about a war that didn't happen." "Apparently," Alara said. He hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say something else, then seemed to think better of it in front of an audience. Later he said instead, "If you're amenable." "I'm amenable," she said. He nodded, gave Theo a final look that was somewhere between respect and lingering wariness, and left the hall. Theo watched him go, then turned back to Alara with raised eyebrows. "So," he said, "that's the man you're going to marry." "Nothing's decided," she said. "Right," Theo said, clearly not believing her for a second. Well, for what it's worth, watching him try to apologize like a normal person instead of issuing a decree was genuinely impressive. I half expected him to have someone else deliver the apology on his behalf. "He's trying," Alara said, and found herself meaning it. "Good," Theo said. "I hope it works out." Genuinely, even though I'll never let him forget that I almost started a war just by asking a girl to dance. "You should absolutely never let him forget that," Alara agreed. They finished breakfast together, easy and unhurried, and for the first time in months, Alara felt something settling in her chest that resembled hope rather than dread. The council meeting, as it turned out, was exactly as uncomfortable as Kyle had predicted. He stood at the head of the long table in the council chamber, facing 8 advisors and lords, all of whom had clearly spent the morning discussing last night's events without him. The silence when he entered had the particular quality of conversation interrupted mid-sentence. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, rising slightly from his seat. "About last night, I know," Kyle said, sitting down heavily in his chair at the head of the table. "I made an error in judgment." "An error," one of the older lords repeated, a man named Bertrand who had served Kyle's father and clearly hadn't adjusted his expectations for the son. "You declared war on the human kingdoms over a dance, Your Majesty. That is somewhat more than an error." "I'm aware," Kyle said, his voice tight. "The Eastern Garrison commander sent an inquiry within the hour," Bertrand continued, undeterred. "He wanted confirmation before mobilizing troops. If he hadn't paused to confirm, I know. Bertrand, we would currently be at war with a kingdom we have no actual grievance against, based entirely on a romantic dispute that I know," Kyle said again, louder this time, and the room went quiet. He took a breath, forced his shoulders down from where they'd crept up toward his ears. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen," he said. "It happened. It was wrong. The order has been formally rescinded, and I've sent personal apologies to the human delegation, including the man I most directly wronged." "And what assurance do we have," Bertrand pressed, "that this won't happen again? That the next time Lady Alara dances with someone you find inconvenient, we won't find ourselves actually at war?" The question hung in the room, and Kale found himself without an immediate answer. It was a fair question. He hated that it was a fair question. "You have my word," he said finally. "Your word," Bertrand repeated, with the particular skepticism of a man who had watched Kale's father give plenty of words that meant nothing. "I'm not my father," Kale said, sharper than he intended. "With respect, Your Majesty, last night you looked remarkably like him." The room went very still. Kyle felt the accusation land somewhere deep, somewhere he didn't want to examine too closely in front of an audience. "You're right," he said after a long moment, and the admission seemed to surprise everyone in the room, Bertrand included. "I did. And I don't intend to become him. Which means I need to actually change something, not just apologize and move on." "What do you propose?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious now rather than just trying to manage the moment. Kyle thought about it carefully. Going forward, any military action involving the human kingdoms requires council approval before mobilization, not just my order. A vote. The room shifted with surprised several advisors exchanging glances, clearly not expecting the king to voluntarily limit his own authority. "That's unprecedented," Marcus said carefully. "It's necessary," Kyle said. "Last night proved that. I can't be trusted to make that decision alone when emotion is involved, so I won't be the only one making it." Bertrand studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, not quite approval, but something adjacent to it. "That's a reasonable proposal," he admitted. I have others, Kyle said, regarding the courtship arrangement with Lady Alara. The room's attention sharpened immediately. I want to formally restructure the agreement, Kyle continued. Not as a political treaty negotiated between fathers, as an actual courtship. With her input. Her choice. If at any point she wishes to end it, that's her right. Treaty obligations be damned. Your Majesty, one of the younger advisors said carefully, the treaty with her father's territory specifically requires I'm aware of what it requires, Kale said. I'll handle the diplomatic consequences if it comes to that. But I won't keep her in an arrangement she doesn't want simply because it's politically convenient. That's exactly the kind of thinking that led to last night. The council exchanged looks among themselves, a silent conversation passing between people who had served together for years. This is highly unusual, Marcus said finally. Most things worth doing are, Kael replied. There was a long pause. Then, Bertrand, surprisingly, was the one who spoke. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, he said, your father never once admitted he was wrong about anything. Not in 30 years of council meetings. He paused. This is different. I'll grant you that much. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it was something close to it, and Kyle found himself absorbing it with more relief than he expected. Vote on the military proposal, he said. Today, if possible. I want it formalized before I see her again tonight. The council, somewhat bewildered but largely cooperative, began the process. That evening, Kyle found Alara in the eastern garden, sitting on a stone bench near a small fountain that had long since stopped working properly, its water trickling in an uneven, halting rhythm rather than the smooth flow it was originally designed for. You found me? She said, not looking up from the book in her lap, though he suspected she'd heard him coming long before he arrived. You're not hard to find, he said, sitting down beside her, leaving a careful distance between them. You always come here when you want to think. You've noticed that? I notice a lot of things, he said. I'm just bad at acting on them in a way that doesn't end in international incidents. She closed the book, finally looking at him. How did the council meeting go? Badly, then well, then strangely productive, he said. Bertrand called me my father to my face. And? He was right, Kyle said simply. So I did something about it. He told her about the council vote, the new restriction on military authority, the formal restructuring of their arrangement. He watched her face carefully as he spoke, gauging her reaction, bracing himself for skepticism. You gave up unilateral war authority, she said slowly, because of one dance. Because of everything that dance revealed about how I handle things I'm afraid of losing, he corrected. The dance was just the moment it became impossible to ignore. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the uneven trickle of the broken fountain. My father is going to be furious about the treaty restructuring, she said eventually. Probably, Kyle agreed. I'm prepared to manage that. You don't know my father. I know he arranged my future without consulting me any more than he consulted you, Kyle said. I think we have some common ground there, actually, that earned him the faintest smile, quick and almost involuntary, like she hadn't meant to let it show. I'm still angry about last night, she said. I want to be clear about that. A council vote doesn't erase the fact that you almost started a war. I know, Kale said. I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking for the chance to be different going forward. Slowly, however long that takes, she studied him in the fading evening light, the garden settling into the particular blue stillness that came just before full dark. Tell me about your father, she said. Really, not the version you give the council. Kael looked at the broken fountain for a long moment before answering. He loved my mother, he said. I genuinely believe that, somewhere underneath everything else, but he loved her the way you love something you're afraid will be taken from you. Every gift was also a leash. Every kindness came with conditions. She stopped laughing somewhere around my 10th birthday, and I don't think anyone in the castle even noticed except me. That's bleak, Alara said quietly. It is, he agreed. I spent most of my childhood terrified of becoming him, and then last night I did exactly the thing I was terrified of, in front of the entire court, over a dance that meant nothing. It clearly meant something to you, she pointed out. It meant I was afraid, he said. Which isn't the same as it meaning anything about you and Theo. I know that now. I think I even knew it last night, somewhere underneath the panic. I just acted on the fear instead of the knowledge. Alara reached over, somewhat hesitantly, and put her hand on top of his where it rested on the stone bench between them. It wasn't a grand gesture, just contact, just acknowledgement. I'm not going to pretend this fixes everything, she said. I know, he said. But it's a start, she said. An honest one, at least. That's all I'm asking for, Kale said, a start. They sat there together, as the garden grew fully dark around them, the broken fountain trickling unevenly beside them, and for the first time since the treaty had been signed 3 months earlier, the silence between them felt less like distance and more like the beginning of something neither of them had quite found the words for yet. 2 weeks passed, and the kingdom slowly stopped talking about the war that almost happened. It wasn't forgotten. Alara doubted it ever would be. Not entirely. Not with Bertrand apparently retelling the story to anyone who hadn't been present that night with increasing dramatic flair each time. But the immediate panic faded, replaced by the ordinary business of court life, treaties and harvests, and the small daily concerns that made up the texture of governing a kingdom. What changed, more noticeably, was Kyle. He started showing up at breakfast, which he hadn't done before, always with some half-formed excuse about needing to discuss morning correspondence, though Alara suspected the correspondence was largely invented. He asked her actual questions, what she thought about trade policy, whether she preferred the eastern or southern gardens, what she'd wanted to be before politics had decided her future for her. A healer, she told him one morning, surprised by her own honesty. When I was young, before I understood that royal daughters don't get to choose careers. What stopped you? He asked. My father said it wasn't appropriate, she said, for someone in my position. Kale was quiet for a moment, turning that over. You could still learn, he said eventually. There's no actual law against it. Just expectation. You'd allow that? I'm not in a position to allow or disallow anything about your life, he said. That's rather the point of what I'm trying to do differently. She studied him across the table, something warming in her chest that she was still hesitant to name. I might take you up on that, she said. I hope you do, he said, and meant it. The courtship, as it had been formally restructured, proceeded slowly. There were walks in the garden that lasted longer than necessary. There were evenings spent in the library, Kyle reading reports while she studied healing texts she'd requested from the royal physician, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. There were small moments, him remembering she preferred her tea without honey, her noticing he always paused before signing anything that affected the human territories, like he was deliberately checking himself against old instincts. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of grand romantic gesture that songs were written about. It was, Alara realized one evening while watching him argue good-naturedly with Marcus about border patrol schedules, something steadier than that. Something built slowly, brick by brick, rather than declared all at once across a ballroom floor. Theo's delegation had long since returned to their own kingdom, but a letter had arrived the week before addressed to both of them, jointly, with the kind of dry humor that suggested Theo found the whole situation endlessly entertaining from a safe diplomatic distance. He says he's told the story of the almost war at 3 separate dinner parties, Alara reported, reading the letter aloud over breakfast, and that he's considering charging admission for future tellings. Of course he is, Kyle said, though without any real irritation this time. He also says, Alara continued, that he's glad it worked out. In his words, tell the king I forgive him, mostly because watching him try to be a normal human being instead of an alpha king was the most entertaining thing I've witnessed all year. I'm thrilled to have provided ongoing entertainment to the human delegation, Kyle said dryly. You should be, Alara said. It's apparently your primary diplomatic contribution this season. He almost smiled at that, a real one. Not the careful, controlled expression he wore in council meetings, but something looser, more unguarded. That evening, they walked in the garden as the sun set, the same garden where they'd first really talked after the disaster of the ball. The broken fountain had finally been repaired, water flowing smoothly now instead of in uneven trickles, and Alara found herself thinking that the metaphor was almost too obvious to be worth noting. I have a question, Kyle said as they walked. You always have a question, she said. It's becoming a pattern. Fair, he said. This one's important, though. She stopped walking, turning to face him properly. Ask it. He looked nervous in a way she hadn't seen from him before, not the controlled tension of council meetings or the barely contained jealousy of the ball, but something more genuine, more uncertain. Would you consider, he said, actually dancing with me? Properly, no war declarations involved. Just a dance. The kind we were supposed to have months ago, before any of this happened. Alara felt something warm settle in her chest. Here? Now? There's no music. I'm aware, he said. I was hoping you might overlook that particular detail. She studied him for a moment, this version of him, uncertain and trying, so different from the man who'd cleared a ballroom with 3 sentences 2 weeks earlier. Fine, she said. But you're terrible at this without an actual song to follow. I'm aware of that limitation too, he said, and offered his hand. She took it. They danced without music in the half-dark garden, moving in slow, imperfect circles around the repaired fountain, Kyle clearly improvising the steps as he went, occasionally miscounting and apologizing, with a quiet laugh that surprised her every time she heard it. You really are terrible at this, she said, as he stepped slightly off rhythm for the 3rd time. I told you, he said. It's only theoretically a requirement for kings to dance well. In practice, most of us just stand very still and let our partners do the actual work. That's a poor excuse. It's the only one I have, he said, and she found herself laughing despite everything, the sound carrying through the quiet garden. They slowed eventually, more swaying than dancing, the night settling fully around them, stars beginning to show through the gaps in the garden's canopy. Can I tell you something, Kale said, his voice quieter now. You usually just do, she pointed out. Fair, he said. I keep thinking about that night. The ball, not the war declaration part though, I think about that too, mostly with horror, but the moment right before. When you were dancing with Theo, and the room had gone quiet, and I was standing there trying to decide what to do. What were you thinking? She asked. That I'd already lost something, he said. Not you, exactly. Something smaller than that, but related. The chance to be the person you laughed with that easily. I'd spent 3 months being too careful, too political, too afraid of overstepping, and in 5 minutes a stranger had done what I couldn't manage in 3 months. You're not a stranger anymore, she said. No, he agreed. I'm working very hard not to be. They stood there together, still swaying slightly though the dance had effectively ended, the silence between them comfortable rather than weighted. I should tell you something too, Alara said. Please, that night, when you cleared the dance floor I was furious. Genuinely, I thought you were exactly what I'd feared you might be, this whole arrangement made real and terrible. She paused, choosing her words carefully, but underneath the fury, there was something else. Some small part of me that was relieved you cared enough to react that strongly, even though the reaction itself was completely wrong. That's a complicated thing to admit, Kale said. Most true things are, she said, echoing words he'd said weeks earlier without quite meaning to. He smiled at the echo, recognizing it. I don't want you to declare wars over me, she continued. I want you to talk to me, argue with me if you need to. Tell me when something bothers you instead of letting it build into something that nearly destroys a kingdom." "I'm trying," he said. "I know it's slow." "Slow is fine," she said. "Slow is actually preferable, given the alternative." They stood in silence for a while longer, the fountain's steady trickle the only sound besides their own breathing. "For what it's worth," Kyle said eventually, "I think I'm starting to understand the difference between holding on to something out of fear and actually choosing it freely." "What's the difference?" she asked. "Fear makes you grip tighter," he said. "Choosing it freely means you could let go, and you don't, because you genuinely want to stay." Alara considered that for a long moment. "And which is this?" she asked. "For you, right now." "I'm trying to make sure it's the second one," he said honestly. "Every day. It's harder than it sounds. I imagine it is," she said. The night had grown properly dark around them now, stars fully visible overhead, the castle windows glowing warm and gold in the distance. She thought about the ballroom 3 weeks earlier, the unfinished song, the cold drop in her stomach when she'd seen the look in his eyes across the dance floor. This felt nothing like that moment. This felt like something built deliberately, slowly, with actual care rather than panic. "Kyle," she said. "Yes? Ask me to dance properly," she said, with actual words this time, not just an offered hand. He straightened slightly, something in his expression turning serious despite the playfulness of the moment before. "Alara," he said, "would you dance with me? Not because of treaties or politics or fear of losing you, just because I'd like to, because I think, given enough time, I could actually learn to do this properly." She felt something settle fully in her chest, something that had been unsteady since the night of the ball finally finding its footing. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." They danced again, slower this time, no rhythm to follow except their own, the garden quiet around them, the broken fountain finally repaired and flowing smooth and steady in the dark. 3 weeks later, Alara's father arrived at the castle, summoned formally for the first time since the original treaty negotiations, and Alara found herself more nervous about this meeting than she'd been about almost anything else in the entire ordeal. Lord Aldrich was not a warm man. He'd never been particularly warm, even when she was a child, his affection always conditional on her behaving exactly as expected, fulfilling exactly the role assigned to her. The news of the restructured treaty of her having an actual say in the arrangement, of military authority being limited, of the courtship proceeding on her terms rather than purely political ones, had clearly not pleased him, based on the formal, clipped letters that had passed between him and the castle over the previous weeks. He arrived in the late morning, his retinue smaller than Alara remembered from previous visits, his expression carefully neutral in the way that had always meant he was furious underneath. "Father," she said, meeting him in the entrance hall, Kyle standing a respectful distance away but visibly present. "Alara," her father said, his eyes moving over her with the particular assessment he'd always applied, checking for flaws, for signs of impropriety. "You look well." "I am well," she said, and found she meant it, which surprised her. Aldrich's gaze shifted to Kale. "Your Majesty," he said, the title carrying an edge of formality that bordered on coldness. "I received your letter regarding the treaty restructuring. I confess I'm somewhat baffled by it." "I imagined you might be," Kyle said evenly. "The original arrangement was clear," Aldrich continued, "a marriage, sealing the alliance between our territories. Your letter suggests something considerably less binding. The original arrangement," Kyle said, "was negotiated without consulting either of the people it would directly affect." "I've come to believe that's an unstable foundation for anything, let alone a marriage." "Stability comes from clear terms," Aldrich said, "not from sentiment." "With respect, Lord Aldrich," Kale said, his voice steady despite the obvious tension, "I nearly declared war on a neighboring kingdom 3 weeks ago over an emotional outburst rooted in exactly the kind of arrangement you're describing. I'd consider that a fairly significant argument against your position. Aldrich's expression flickered surprise, then something more careful. I heard rumors of that incident, he said. I'd assumed they were exaggerated. They weren't, Alara said. I was there. He nearly mobilized the Eastern garrison because I danced with a human delegate. Her father's eyes moved to her, something assessing in his gaze that she recognized from childhood, the same look he'd given her when she'd done something unexpected, something outside the careful boundaries he preferred. And you're comfortable? He said slowly, with a man capable of that kind of reaction? I'm comfortable, Alara said, with a man who recognized it was wrong, restructured his own authority to prevent it happening again, and has spent 3 weeks actually trying to understand me as a person rather than a political arrangement. That's considerably more than I can say for the arrangement you originally negotiated. The silence that followed was heavier than the one in the ballroom 3 weeks earlier, though for entirely different reasons. I see, Aldrich said finally. Lord Aldrich, Chaol said, I understand this isn't the arrangement you originally envisioned, but I'd like your blessing for what it's becoming, rather than what it was meant to be. And if I withhold it? Aldrich asked. Then I'll respect that, Chaol said, though I'd note that Alara is capable of making her own decisions regardless of either of our preferences. Alara felt a small flare of surprise at him deferring to her agency so plainly, in front of her father, without hedging. Aldrich studied them both for a long moment, the careful calculation of a man who had built his life on alliances and arrangements rather than sentiment. You've changed, he said finally, looking at Chaol. Or, you're performing change very convincingly. I suppose time will tell which it is, Chaol said. It will, Aldrich agreed. He turned to Alara. And you? Are you happy with this arrangement? Truthfully, Alara considered the question carefully, thinking about the ballroom, the broken fountain, the slow accumulation of small, honest moments over the past 3 weeks. I'm happier than I've been in years, she said, though I recognize that's not the same as everything being resolved. No, Aldrich said. It rarely is. He was quiet for a long moment, and Alara watched something shift in his expression, not quite warmth, but something closer to acknowledgement than she'd expected. I'll withhold judgment, he said finally. For now. I'd like to see how this develops before offering any blessing beyond that. That's fair, Chaol said. It's more than fair, Aldrich said. Given the circumstances 3 weeks ago, I'd say it's generous. Alara almost laughed at the dry, careful humor so unlike her father, and yet exactly the kind of thing he'd say. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it was something. A door left open rather than firmly closed. It would do. For now. The months that followed moved slowly, in the way that genuine change usually does not in grand declarations, but in small accumulated choices that gradually shifted the shape of things. Alara began studying with the royal physician 3 mornings a week, learning the careful, patient work of healing that she'd wanted as a child and never been permitted to pursue. Chaol never once questioned the decision, though she caught him occasionally watching her practice bandaging techniques on willing kitchen staff with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing endearing rather than improper. The council, somewhat to everyone's surprise, had grown more functional rather than less under the new restrictions on military authority. Bertrand, who had been Chaol's harshest critic in the aftermath of the almost war, found himself reluctantly impressed by how the king handled disputes now pausing before reacting, consulting rather than declaring, asking questions instead of issuing decrees. It's almost like having an actual functioning government, Bertrand had remarked dryly during one meeting, and Chaol had taken it as the highest compliment the old advisor was capable of giving. Theo's letters continued to arrive periodically, each one drier and more amused than the last, documenting his ongoing retelling of the almost war to increasingly larger audiences. Alara suspected he'd be telling the story for the rest of his life, embellishing it slightly more with each retelling, until eventually the Alpha King's declaration of war over a single dance would become the kind of legend told to children, half history and half cautionary tale. She didn't mind. There were worse legacies to carry. On a clear evening in early autumn, almost exactly 6 months after the ball, Kyle found her in the garden again, the same bench near the now functioning fountain. Though this time she wasn't reading. She was simply sitting, watching the last light fade from the sky, content in a way that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "You're not studying anatomy texts for once," he observed, sitting down beside her. "I'm allowed an evening off occasionally," she said. "Rare, but allowed," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fountain trickling steadily beside them, the garden settling into its evening quiet. "I have something to ask you," Kyle said eventually. "You always have something to ask," she said, though without any real complaint in it. "It's become something of a signature trait. This one's different," he said. She turned to look at him properly, and something in his expression made her sit up slightly, paying closer attention. "I'd like to formally claim you," he said, "not because of any treaty, or any pressure from your father, or political necessity. Because I've spent 6 months actually getting to know you, and I'm certain, genuinely certain, not the panicked certainty I felt at that ball that I want you as my mate. Properly, with your full agreement, and nothing forced about it." Alara felt something warm and steady settle in her chest, very different from the cold panic she'd felt that night in the ballroom. "What changed?" she asked. "Between then and now?" "Everything," he said simply. "I learned the difference between fear and genuine choice. I learned what it actually means to want someone freely, rather than out of fear of losing them. I learned that you laughing at something Theo said wasn't a threat, it was just you being happy, and I wanted to be the reason for that happiness too, eventually, earned, rather than declared. That's considerably more articulate than 'I'm declaring war before this song ends,'" she said. "I should hope so," Kyle said. "It's taken me 6 months to get here." She studied him in the fading light, this version of him, steady and certain in a way that felt earned rather than performed, so far from the man who'd cleared a ballroom floor with 3 sharp sentences. "Ask me properly," she said, "all of it. Not just the claiming part." Kyle took a breath, steadying himself. "Alara," he said, "would you be my mate? Not because of treaties, or politics, or arrangements made before either of us had any say. Because I love you properly, completely, in the way I should have told you months ago instead of letting it build into something that nearly destroyed everything." The word landed between them, love, finally spoken plainly, without the complications of politics or fear wrapped around it. "Yes," she said, and found the word came easily, without hesitation, without the careful calculation that had governed so much of their early arrangement. "I love you too. I think I have for longer than I wanted to admit." He smiled, the real one, unguarded, the one she'd come to recognize as entirely different from his careful public expressions. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm never declaring war over a dance again." "You'd better not," she said. "Next time, just ask me to dance properly. With words. Like a person." "I'll work on that," he said. They sat together as the evening settled fully into night, the fountain trickling steadily beside them, the garden holding its quiet, and somewhere in the castle behind them, the faint sound of music drifted from a celebration neither of them needed to attend, content instead with the simple, steady fact of choosing each other freely, finally, after everything it had taken to get there.